We're in real trouble.
Why? What's happening?
Moments after takeoff,
the aircraft began to shake and rattle.
We're going down, Larry. I know it.
a 737 plunges into the frozen Potomac River.
I thought I was going to die in that airplane that day.
A Washington news team captures breathtaking video.
It's not fair. This woman's going to die right in front of us.
The images shock the nation. With limited evidence to go on,
I don't seem right.
The reporter doesn't tell you anything about the engines.
Forward.
investigators need to try something new.
Forward.
Lose the crew voices.
They turn to an ingenious plan to solve the mystery of Air Florida Flight 90.
He should have trusted his instincts.
January the 13th, 1982. Planes at Washington's National Airport are snowed in.
The weather conditions that day in Washington, D.C., and particularly out at National Airport, were very difficult. It was snowing, and it was cold. It was down around 24 degrees Fahrenheit. It was a rather miserable day, and as the day progressed, the snow increased.
It's 2:15 p.m. The 74 passengers on board Air Florida Flight 90 should be in the air by now. But their plane is still at the gate.
We should have rebooked when we saw the weather.
We might still make it.
Joe Stiley is a businessman and private pilot. He and his secretary Nikki Felch are traveling to Florida on business.
By and large, everybody realized that it was one of those days. It was a snowy day. The chances of getting out were 50-50 maybe.
Airport crews are working to clear the snow. For now, no one takes off or lands.
You know, in Washington, National Airport only has one runway, and so they don't have the option of removing snow on one runway while they're using the other and then switching back and forth the way many airports do. When they need to close the one runway, the airport's closed.
Flight 90 is commanded by Captain Larry Wheaton.
60 degrees in Tampa and we're stuck in a snowstorm.
Definitely be good to get home.
His first officer is Roger Pettit. Florida is home for both men.
We know passengers hate delays. They just hate them. Well, the pilots hate them too. And the air traffic system hates them, because it's just a massive inconvenience for everyone.
Also on board, Bert Hamilton, a purchasing manager from Maryland. He's heading to Tampa on business. Priscilla Tirado is moving to Florida to start a new life with her husband Jose and their infant son.
It's just de-icing fluid.
I guess we need it.
2:45 p.m. The plane gets de-iced. If they can keep their wings clear of snow and ice, the pilots should be able to take off as soon as the airport reopens. After an hour and a quarter,
Tower.
National Airport finally reopens.
Reopening now. Copy that. Okay, showtime.
Controllers now face a massive logistical puzzle.
Eastern 133, taxi into position and hold.
Eastern 133, position and hold.
There are more than 20 planes waiting to take off or land.
There would have been a lot of people talking at once trying to figure out, you know, when am I going to get released? When am I going to go?
162.
Grumman 1625, turn left, taxi and hold. Winds are 010 at 10.
That's the kind of thing that creates a lot of anxiety in the air traffic control tower.
804, we clear to land.
Stand by, please, 804.
We've got 40 or 50 airplanes on the ground, and they're all trying to be the first one out.
Eastern 1551, keep it at reduced.
That puts an extra strain on both the ground handling folks and also up in the control tower.
Okay, Palm 90, you'll be falling in line behind...
Apple DC-9.
Palm 90. Behind that apple, I guess.
Captain Wheaton will take off behind a New York Air DC-9. As the Air Florida 737 taxis to the runway, flight attendant Kelly Duncan makes a final cabin check.
Apple 58, cleared for takeoff. Traffic's 3 south.
For the runway. Apple 58, takeoff.
I think we might get to go here in a minute. Ought to get to work. Stabilizer trim set at 5.3. Set. EPR all the way to 204. Set.
556.
Cleared to land.
Clear to land, 556.
A Palm 90, taxi into position.
And be ready for an immediate takeoff.
Palm 90. Ladies and gentlemen.
We've just been cleared on the runway for takeoff. Flight attendants, please be seated.
We got something over the loudspeaker from the crew indicating that we were scheduled for departure.
I thought we might never get out of here.
Palm 90, cleared for takeoff.
Palm 90 cleared for takeoff. Your throttles. Okay.
Today, First Officer Pettit will be flying the plane. Captain Wheaton will monitor their instruments. The engines spool up quickly.
Oh. Ooh. Really cold here. Real cold.
The plane soon has enough power to accelerate down the runway. They can't get airborne until they reach takeoff speed, 139 knots.
God, look at that thing. That don't seem right. Does it? Yes, it is. There's 80. Huh? Maybe it is right. 120.
Joe Stiley is a pilot who's familiar with this airport. He can tell that something's wrong.
I got real nervous about halfway down the runway.
B1.
When the plane lifts off, Stiley's sense of doom gets worse.
When we got airborne, almost instantly it was clear that that aircraft was not flying normally. And I turned to Nikki and I said, we're in real trouble.
Why? What's happening?
All of the dishes, cups, glasses that were in the galley started to rattle, shake, and make a very loud noise. And the aircraft began to shake and rattle.
The stick shaker activates, warning the pilots the plane is losing lift.
Easy.
Captain Wheaton urges Pettit to push the nose of the plane down, a key step for regaining lift.
Forward. Forward.
Joe Stiley prepares for the worst.
Just do what I do.
I put my head down, and I saw people around me staring at me, and then a couple of them took the example that I gave.
Come on, up, forward, forward. Move, up, barely climb.
Less than a minute after takeoff, Air Florida Flight 90 is falling to the ground.
Stay down. Keep your head down.
The crew increases engine power, but it's too late.
Larry, we're going down, Larry. I know it.
The plane hits a bridge over the Potomac River.
Felt like almost like we rotated at 90 degrees, like we were going to somersault or something like that. And then we hit the water, and that was a real impact, much greater than the one with the bridge. And I felt myself blacking out. I thought I was going to die in that airplane that day.
Air Florida Flight 90 is sinking beneath the ice of Washington's Potomac River.
When I regained consciousness, I was actually sitting upright in my seat, and the water was starting to come into my mouth and nose. I had a broken foot, broken ankle on both sides. So I got my leg loose. Then I did the same thing to Nikki's right leg. I got her out of, she had a summer problem. And I just pulled her by the hand and started heading aft and went over the seats behind me.
Of the 79 people on board, 6 escaped from the shattered wreckage and reached the surface.
I knew I was out of the aircraft when it ceased to be totally black.
The plane has left a trail of destruction on Washington's 14th Street Bridge. 4 people were killed in their cars. 4 more were seriously injured as the 737 slid from the bridge into the river below. The fate of the passengers and crew is still unknown. Word of the disaster soon reaches news cameraman Chester Panzer.
The assignment desk called on the radio and said, "We heard something about a small plane crash at National Airport."
Come in, Chester. Are you there? There's been a crash at National Airport. We want you to check it out.
I started speeding down the highway.
By the time Panzer arrives at the crash site, rescue teams are already at work, including a helicopter from the U.S. Park Police.
We grabbed our gear out of the trunk. We could hear a helicopter faintly in the distance. We connected our umbilical cable from the camera to the recording deck. We could see a flashing light. And I started rolling. And the first thing I saw was someone being loaded into an ambulance.
It's Bert Hamilton, the purchasing manager from Maryland. He's the first passenger rescued from the Potomac River. The rest of the survivors are still battling the icy waters. Flight attendant Kelly Duncan reaches for the rescue line. Beside her, wearing a life vest, is Secretary Nikki Felch. Priscilla Tirado has lost her baby and can see no sign of her husband. She clings to businessman and private pilot Joe Stiley.
Once I surfaced there, I looked around, and that airplane was gone except for this little piece of it that I was holding on to.
Barely visible to the camera is one last survivor, Arland Williams. He's badly tangled in the wreckage and urges the others to take the lifeline first.
There was a fellow who was strapped into his seat right in front of us who couldn't get out because a bunch of cables and things like that had gotten around him, and he was just wired in place there. And then I turned to Nikki and I said, "I'm all broken up and I know I can't swim. My legs aren't working."
There was a big gaping hole in the ice with big cracks, and it looked like someone had taken a baseball, thrown it through a window.
I looked up and there were probably, it seemed like 10,000 people up on that bridge and along the sides of it looking at us. And we were out there freezing to death. All those people standing up there and nobody could do anything.
The river is near freezing and filled with thick ice. It's too dangerous for rescuers to enter the water. Panzer keeps rolling as the helicopter lifts a second person from the river. It's flight attendant Kelly Duncan.
She was holding on, and the helicopter was just flying her in.
In the numbing cold, Joe Stiley does his best to help two other passengers, Nikki Felch and Priscilla Tirado.
I had Priscilla in a kind of an arm lock on this side, and I had Nikki on this side, but this arm wasn't working very well. And the helicopter began to pull us away into the water. I lost Nikki almost instantly because this whole arm just was dysfunctional. And I had Priscilla under that arm for about halfway across the river, and we started running into the broken ice. I was coming up into those ice packs, one pack after another, and all my ribs ended up being broken. At some point during that, I lost my grip on Priscilla and left her laying there on top of a block of ice.
Joe is pulled to safety, but Priscilla Tirado is now stranded and alone. The helicopter drops Priscilla a life ring.
I watched her be towed off. I saw her lose her grip on the lifeline.
That's when it hit me, and that this woman was going to drown in front of me. She was in the open water, and she's being pushed under the water by the helicopter wash.
Then one bystander decides to take action.
He didn't think about how cold the water was, didn't think what it would do to him.
It's a federal government employee named Lenny Skutnik.
He really was a hero in that he had enough guts to do it and just didn't think about the consequences.
Lenny reacted. Nobody else did. They were probably all standing around. I wanted to react, but I couldn't.
Skutnik's bravery saves Priscilla's life, but her husband and baby are among the dead.
And the paramedic reaches out and grabs Nikki Felch and just grabs a hold of her, hoists her up onto the skid the best he can. And he's not even secured into the helicopter. He's basically balancing himself, so it's pretty amazing.
It's now been 45 minutes since Flight 90 plunged into the icy river. Too long for anyone to survive in the freezing water.
Something's going on, it's not good.
Air traffic controllers in California face a catastrophe.
The radar control said something like,
Use Air West 706, radio check. How do you hear me?
no answer.
A passenger plane with 49 people on board vanishes from radar.
What happened? Was it a structural issue? It had crashed for some reason, and we had no idea whatsoever.
Witnesses describe an almost unthinkable scenario.
Was that something there?
We didn't see it. 4 sets of eyes didn't see it.
It might have been a plane, maybe not.
The fact that somebody says something doesn't prove anything until you've proved it yourself.
What the hell were those guys doing up there?
Los Angeles International Airport. Hughes Air West Flight 706 prepares for takeoff. There are 44 passengers on board. Their flight is a city hopper with stops in Utah, Idaho, and Washington State.
Welcome aboard, folks. We'll be getting underway
Any minute now.
Captain Theodore Nikolai is in command today.
Captain Nikolai had flown for the Air Force. He was pretty senior, so anybody who was flying with him felt comfortable because of his seniority. You knew he knew what he was doing.
Los Angeles International is one of the busiest hubs in North America. Controllers direct crews to follow specific air corridors on departure.
Air West 706 grid, cleared for takeoff, runway 24 left. Climb via heading 250.
Roger, 24 left, climb heading 250.
First Officer Price Bruner is also highly experienced.
Weather's looking clear all the way to Seattle.
He has even more hours in the air than Captain Nikolai.
Price was actually checked out as a captain, although he elected to fly as first officer, and I think he truly enjoyed being in the cockpit.
Flight attendant Pat Shelton flies this route regularly.
She was a beautiful gal with lots of long, dark hair, and she had just gotten engaged. She was so looking forward to getting married, and she was at a happy state in her life.
Runway's clear. Brakes released.
In 1971, airlines in the US have been flying the DC-9 for more than 5 years. Its two efficient turbofan engines make it ideal for short to medium-haul flights.
Throttles are all yours.
80 knots.
At 6:02 p.m., the Hughes Air West flight lifts off from LA.
Turn right, heading 060.
Air West 706 red, right 060.
The heading takes the plane west over the Pacific Ocean before turning northeast towards its first stop, Salt Lake City. 4 minutes after takeoff, First Officer Bruner contacts a different control center north of LA.
Los Angeles Center, good evening. Air West 706 red with you.
Climbing through 6,000.
The Los Angeles Air Route Traffic Control Center.
Air West 706 red, turn left,
Heading 040 until receiving Daggett.
Head controller Roger Anderson is helping a trainee operator get up to speed.
That's it. You got to keep scanning.
It's something where you can't stop and think about each decision in depth. You have to make quick decisions, a lot of reaction. You got to move at a fast pace.
Controllers must keep planes at a safe distance from one another as they fly in and out of LA.
In addition to Air West, the radar controller may have been talking to 5 or 6 other jets climbing out towards the northeast, in addition to a small number of crisscrossers back and forth through the airspace.
Okay, 040, direct to Daggett.
The controllers monitor the Hughes Air West DC-9 on radar. They use markers called shrimp boats to track the position of every plane.
Shrimp boats. This was before automation, and these were little small plastic markers with a pointy end, and we'd write on them with a grease pencil, and it would contain just basic information like aircraft call sign, sometimes the assigned altitudes, as much information as you can squeeze with a grease pencil onto a little plastic marker.
The sound of an emergency transmitter warns the controllers that a plane in the area may be in trouble. They need more information to figure out what's happening.
Frequently at the time, people would accidentally trigger the transmitter. It was seldom a real situation, so we didn't tend to pay that much attention to it. At this point, we look back, and our shrimp boats, where Air West 706 is, the target's missing. The radar controller said something like,
Hughes Air West 706, reset your transponder. Radar contact lost.
There's no answer. Air West 706.
Radio check, how do you hear me?
No answer. This is getting bad now. We've lost a target, and we've got no communications with the aircraft.
Anderson realizes the enormity of the situation when the crew of a nearby military plane radios in.
Center, we've just seen an explosion on the side of a mountain.
Hey, something's going on. It's not good.
And he said, Center, I didn't see it. When my co-pilot looked out the window, he saw explosions on the side of the mountain. Well, then, we knew something bad had happened.
What the hell happened?
A DC-9 with 49 people on board has slammed into the California hills.
Did Air West just explode? Did a wing fall off? What happened? Was it a structural issue? It had crashed for some reason, and we had no idea whatsoever.
The loss of the DC-9 will attract a lot of attention because of its high-profile owner. Just a year earlier, the airline was purchased by billionaire aviator Howard Hughes, one of the most famous people in America.
Howard Hughes was looking for an airline to buy at a good price, and eventually they found Air West. It then became Hughes Air West.
The National Transportation Safety Board assigns one of its top investigators to the case, Second World War Navy pilot Dick Baker.
San Gabriel Mountains.
The crash location poses an immediate challenge.
Okay. We're gonna need choppers to get in there. In the meantime, I want you to find me anyone who saw anything. Now.
In this case, the accident site was very remote and in very precipitous mountain terrain. That makes it always difficult for the investigators to get out there.
The crash site is just a few kilometers from the town of Duarte, California. It's the best place to find witnesses. In the hours after the crash, dozens of people come forward with the same story. They say they heard an explosion and looked up to see the DC-9 falling like a leaf to the ground. Most have no idea what caused the explosion, but a handful of witnesses say they do. They insist it was a mid-air collision between the DC-9 and a fighter jet.
Witness statements can be notoriously deceiving, but in a mid-air collision, they're generally pretty accurate as to the fact that a collision occurred.
Investigators need to figure out where this second jet may have come from. With the American war in Vietnam raging, military air bases on the West Coast are extremely active. There are several in Southern California alone.
In the 70s, there was lots of military training going on in Southern California.
3,000. We're not getting any oxygen. We have the terrain alarm. Even Tower Aero Peru 603. We are in an emergency.
On the night of the 24th of August, 2001, a fully loaded Airbus A330 with 306 people on board ran out of fuel midway over the Atlantic. How could a state-of-the-art, computerized airliner suffer such a catastrophic failure?
Mayday, mayday, mayday. We have lost both engines due to fuel starvation. We are gliding now. Well, we're now at 30,000 feet at the rate of descent of 2,000 feet per minute.
May have to ditch in the water.
And you didn't put on your life jackets right now? Really?
This film investigates what happened to Air Transat Flight 236.
This is it. It's over. They're just going to die in the next 5 to 10 minutes.
And the speed's increasing. 203 knots now. It's way too fast.
Everybody, I need you to brace. Oh my God!
August 23rd, 2001. Toronto's International Airport is busy. Air Transat is a charter company that has grown rapidly to become one of the largest airlines in Canada. Midsummer brings fewer business travelers and a holiday atmosphere. Air Transat Flight 236 is bound for Lisbon. Most of the passengers are Canadians visiting Europe or Portuguese immigrants heading home. The plane, a twin-engined Airbus A330, is being flown by a young co-pilot, Dirk de Jager, and an experienced captain, Robert Pichet.
Captain Robert Pichet is somewhat out of the ordinary. Captain Pichet, from the moment he gets his wing, he gets to learn how to fly in the north of the province of Quebec, where the conditions occasionally are very severe.
The flight deck of the A330 is ultra-modern. Banks of computers connected to over 100 onboard sensors constantly monitor the operation of the plane. This film reveals how serious problems can arise when the pilots get unusual readings from the computers and begin to distrust them. On this night, the computers assist the smooth takeoff of Flight 236.
236 Heavy, follow A320 Air Canada. Turn left on Romeo and hold short on 24 right.
Roger, follow A320 Air Canada, left on Romeo and hold short of 24 right.
With the crew of 13, Flight 236 has 306 people on board.
Transat 236 Heavy, cleared for takeoff.
240 at 8, cleared for takeoff, 24 right, Transat 236 Heavy.
At 10 minutes past 8, the Airbus A330, loaded with over 47 tons of fuel, left Toronto for Lisbon.
V1, rotate.
The weather forecast for the Atlantic crossing is good. Everything runs smoothly on the flight deck, apart from a small adjustment to the route. To avoid congestion, air traffic control directs the flight 60 miles south of its original route. It's a minor alteration, but will play a crucial role later. Passengers settle down for the long crossing.
Everything appeared quite normal, and in fact, I had traveled on Air Transat previously and found it not to be very good, and was surprised by the quality of the flight, that it was on time, the plane was newer, and we thought generally it was much better than we had expected it would be.
We're getting to our next checkpoint.
Every 30 minutes across the Atlantic, the crew check their position and fuel consumption against their flight plan.
0.2 tons on the right, 11.2 tons on the left.
Despite the computerized systems, some procedures like checking the fuel on board still need to be done by hand.
9.2 tons.
By comparing the amount of fuel in the tanks with the amount the flight started with, the pilots can keep an eye on their fuel consumption.
Fuel check complete. Levels normal for the distance flown.
All right.
For the first 5 hours, everything is routine. The flight crew, Air Transat, and accident investigators have all declined to be interviewed about what happened next. This film uses known facts about the flight standard emergency procedures and expert opinion to reconstruct what took place on Flight 236.
Look, we're getting a warning signal. Oil temp low and oil pressure high on number 2.
This warning is the first step in the crisis.
Oil pressure is within normal limits on number 1. Number 2 is slightly high.
The computer display reveals that the oil temperature is low in engine number 2, but the oil pressure is high. It is a very unusual reading. The pilots are puzzled.
I can't see anything here. I'll look in the FCOM.
Okay.
A low oil temperature indication is normally indicative of bad readings, bad sensor. Oil temperatures don't decrease normally, they increase. A low oil temperature would be of no concern. The high oil pressure is a very strange indication. It's very rare. In fact, I've never actually heard of one. It's only indicative of the contamination normally of the oil with fuel. That's not something that's explained in the manuals.
Call the company.
The crew contact Air Transat's maintenance group in Montreal.
Transat 236 to Mirabel Operations.
Mirabel Transat 236. Hi.
Hi, we have a little problem. We're getting a warning oil temp low and oil pressure high on the ECAM for engine number 2. There's nothing in the QRH nor the FCOM. Can you help us out?
I'm looking in the manual.
The ground crew have no immediate solution. The pilots must work it out themselves.
They may have been given some advice on troubleshooting to see if that would help. But ultimately, the pilots are up there on their own. They can get advice from somebody 2,500 miles away, but they can't really fix their problems.
Suggest you keep monitoring your oil levels and see what happens. Advise us on
But because the oil readings are so unusual, the pilots believe they may indicate a computer error. The crew keep monitoring the oil levels. Air Transat 236 continues on track. Then, 20 minutes later, a new warning.
Fuel imbalance warning. Haven't seen that before. Follow all ECAM action. I have air traffic control.
In the Airbus 330, most of the fuel is in large tanks in the wings. The computer has now detected that the fuel level on the right is now significantly lower than the left. The crew consults the Airbus flight manual, which recommends they transfer fuel through the special cross-feed valve. Fuel will then flow from one tank to the other. But before opening the cross-feed, the pilots must be sure that the imbalance is not caused by a more serious problem, such as a fuel leak.
Last fuel check was only 15 minutes ago and it was okay. No indication of a fuel leak. Keep going.
Wing crossfeed. On.
On.
Once you begin a cross-feeding procedure to correct a fuel imbalance, restorative action should commence quite quickly. In other words, the situation would not continue to get worse. It would either stabilize immediately and then begin to correct itself.
But the situation is not correcting itself. Unknown to the pilots, there is a major fuel leak in the number 2 engine on the right-hand side of the plane. Flight 236 is some 300 kilometers from the nearest land, in mid-Atlantic. 39,000 feet over the Atlantic, some 300 kilometers from land, Air Transat Flight 236 is in trouble. Unknown to the pilots, the right engine is leaking fuel. The plane's computer system has thrown up a series of warnings, but the pilots believe these are computer errors.
Have you ever seen something like this before?
No. Never. Doesn't make any sense.
Hey, even if there is a leak, it doesn't explain the alarms on the oil system.
And everything was okay at the last fuel check at 30 West. Oh. Bet you it's a computer problem.
The task of finding out if there is a fuel leak is made harder by the design of the Airbus systems.
The systems monitor hundreds and hundreds of sensors. And, they can be affected by, such mundane things as a little bit of frost or ice on a sensor can cause it to present bad data.
There is no direct warning to show if the fuel level is falling faster than the engines are consuming it. So the pilots receive no immediate indication that there could be a fuel leak.
Fuel quantity isn't rising in the tanks for the right wing.
Check fuel quantity.
Looks very low. Hold on.
When co-pilot de Jager carries out the fuel calculations, he discovers something is seriously wrong.
That's much less fuel than we should have. It looks like a fuel leak.
check again.
De Jager finds a disturbing difference.
According to all the gauges, all the tanks in the right wing are way below the level they should be according to the flight plan, and there's hardly anything in the other ones.
What about the trim tank?
There's nothing there either.
Yes?
Hello, first officer here.
Can you come to the cockpit, please?
Sure.
Although Captain Pichet still believes he is dealing with a computer problem, he nevertheless decides to ask for a visual check just in case, to see if there could be a fuel leak.
Captain?
Hi. Can you and Karen take some flashlights and go to the windows if you can see anything trailing back from the wings? It'll look like a mist or a stream, and report back immediately.
Okay.
Dirk, I want you to do another complete fuel check, please.
I'm so sorry.
In daylight, the fuel pouring out the back of the wing would have been clearly visible. But in the dead of night, even with a torch, the fuel leaking from the engine is impossible to see.
The crew evidently realized that the situation was not improving, and at that point they realized that their circumstances were becoming more serious. And I think that there were probably some discussions took place between the two pilots as to what their next course of action should be.
If the computer is correct, then with the amount of fuel remaining, the Airbus will no longer be able to make it to Lisbon. Captain Pichet is forced to divert the flight.
We've got to divert. Get on to Oceanic Control. Where's the nearest airfield?
Transat 236 Heavy, Santa Maria Control. Can you advise nearest airfield? We have a possible fuel problem.
The nearest runway is over 300 kilometers away. With the fuel remaining, Lagesse Military Air Base on the tiny island of Terceira in the Azores should be within reach.
Santa Maria Control, Transat 236 Heavy. Proceed 230, flight level 390 direct. 350 miles to threshold. Are you declaring an emergency?
Stand by, Santa Maria Control.
Not yet. It must be the computer.
Transat 236 Heavy, Santa Maria Control. No assistance required yet.
Flight 236 continues flying south for the next 25 minutes. Everything in the cabin seems normal. But in the cockpit, the fuel readings are getting worse.
Must be the computer.
Well, I've checked. There's nothing in the trim or center tank. And the gauges show only 7.5...
According to the fuel gauges, the plane is using fuel much faster than normal. Whether they believe the gauges or not, the captain has no choice. He must warn air traffic control.
We have to declare a fuel emergency.
Transat 236 Heavy, Santa Maria Control.
Santa Maria Control, Transat 236 Heavy, go ahead.
Transat 236 Heavy, declaring fuel emergency.
I really hope it's a computer bug. Because if we land in the Azores with half a plane full of fuel, they'll crucify us.
But at 6:13 a.m., less than an hour from the first fuel alarm, the full gravity of their situation strikes home. The right-hand engine runs out of fuel and cuts out.
We're losing engine number 2. I don't believe this. Okay, maximum thrust on number 1.
Hang on. What's
The
happening?
lights started flickering on and off, which I thought was kind of odd, strange.
On one engine, the Airbus will not fly at 39,000 feet. They must descend quickly.
Try to transfer fuel from center tank and the trim tank.
Transferring. Fuel quantities reaching 0.
This can't be. We're not gonna go completely dry on this airplane. All right. We can't stay at 39,000 feet with just one engine. We'll descend to 33,000 to control our speed.
236 Galages Tower. We have lost one engine. Engine flame out.
Roger, Transat 236. We can see you on primary radar. You are at 135 nautical miles from Lajes Field.
We are 135 nautical miles from Lajes Field.
For the next 10 minutes, the stricken Airbus continues on its one remaining engine. The pilots still believe that the computer may be partly faulty and that they can make it to Lajes with fuel to spare.
At the end, might be all right.
Fuel gauge is falling fast, though. It's nearly hitting 0.
But 13 minutes after the right-hand engine cut out, and with 157 kilometers still to go, the left engine begins to fail.
We're losing number 1.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. We have lost both engines due to fuel starvation. We are gliding now.
One of the most sophisticated airliners of the modern era, carrying 306 passengers and crew, is now nothing more than a giant glider, drifting steadily down towards the ocean.
Honey, it doesn't work.
Excuse me, can somebody come? Where's the flight attendant? Hello?
You can literally hear a pin drop. The exterior, there was no sound in that plane, in that cabin at all.
A lot of people were praying and screaming for God.
List of functions we've lost. We have no more stabilizer. Blue and yellow hydraulic. No ADR 2 and 3. No anti-skid. No reversers. Rudder trim. Radio HF 1 and 2.
With the loss of both engines, we have no electrical system. If the engines aren't running, the generators aren't running. So there's no power on the airplane. There is a small device, it's called a ram air turbine. It will deploy from underneath the fuselage near the wing fairing. And it's a small propeller that deploys out the bottom of the fuselage and it spins in the wind. And that small propeller will provide very limited electrical and hydraulic systems to run the aircraft. In other words, although it's a glider, at least it's a controllable glider.
Calculate how far we can go with our glide angle, will you?
Well, we're now at 30,000 feet at the rate of descent of 2,000 feet per minute. We can hang on for 14 or 15 minutes.
What? I don't want to die on our honeymoon.
I was just trying to calm her down, like try and reassure her that everything would be okay.
It's a very big struggle to stay calm when you're considering your own death.
Without power, the plane loses 1,000 feet in height for every 5 kilometers it travels forward. They can reach the Azores, but if the pilots make a mistake, they may face a forced landing on the water.
We have to ditch in the water.
Air Transat Flight 236 is now drifting without fuel over the Atlantic. Although their initial calculations show that the plane should make it to Lajes, Captain Pichet must now follow standard emergency procedure in a passenger jet over water.
Prepare the cabin.
The cabin's slowly depressurizing.
We need to put our oxygen masks on.
The loss of engine power means the cabin will soon depressurize.
I need your attention. We're preparing to ditch the plane. I need you to put on your life jackets right now.
Within probably, I'd say, 2 minutes, I saw flight attendants with life jackets in their hand running down the aisles. And obviously, that was a sign of fear. What was happening was the first question that popped in my mind.
I just need to tie this up like that.
You don't really know what to think. But people did start to panic at that point when they were told to put on life jackets.
This isn't working. No, it's all right. Remain, please keep her calm. It's not working.
My best friend was talking to his father. His father died 3 years ago. But he's talking to him because he thought for sure he was going to be joining him.
Ditching a large passenger jet on the water presents a severe hazard. If the Airbus 330 has to make a forced landing, the chances of survival are bleak.
In my personal opinion, I don't think these airplanes would make very good boats. Typically, an airplane with a low-mounted tail like this, as it enters the water, one of the first things that's going to hit the water is the tail, and it's probably going to be ripped right off, and the fuselage is probably going to open right about there.
In 1996, a Boeing 767 ran out of fuel off the coast of East Africa. Its last moments were caught on amateur video and reveal what happens when an airliner attempts a controlled landing on water. Of the 175 people on board the Ethiopian Airways jet, only 50 survived.
The chances of it surviving ditching and floating for very long are not very good.
If Air Transat Flight 236 has to carry out a similar maneuver, it faces an equally grave outcome. With over 100 kilometers before they reach the Azores, the pilots face a long and difficult maneuver. They need to keep the plane gliding for more than 15 minutes to reach the Azores.
Transat 236 Heavy to Lajes Tower. Lajes Tower receiving Transat 236 Heavy.
Do you have us
on radar, Transat 236? We have you on primary radar. Confirm you're at 80 miles out. Your heading is good.
Transat 236 Heavy Lajes Tower, we are trying to make the runway. Please
describe runway, heading, and length. Lajes Tower, Transat 236 Heavy. Runway is 33 and 10,865 feet long. Airport dead ahead on your present heading. Please advise when you have it in sight.
Transat 236 Heavy, we cannot see the airport. We will tell you when we can.
As the minutes tick by, the long wait for those on board is agonizing.
That's it. This is it. It's over. They're just going to die in the next 5 to 10 minutes.
I had contemplated the idea that we would die, certainly. And kind of I think in that moment you can accept it more than you think you would accept it.
The torture of the whole fact that you're going to die, which I totally thought I was going to, is worse to me than dying. If I'm going to die, just kill me now. Just get a gun and shoot me, or just let this plane go down and nosedive into the ocean and then just die instantly.
On the ground, emergency services prepare for the crash landing of a fully loaded airliner. With 20 kilometers to go, the crew now prepare for the most dangerous part of the operation, getting their plane on the runway in one piece.
Heavy to Lajes Tower, do you have our distance from threshold now and weather, please?
Roger, Transat 236 Heavy. You are 8 miles out according to primary radar. Airspeed 280 knots according to our reading. Visibility unlimited. You should have the airport in sight. Negative, Lajes Tower. Until now, we cannot see the runway.
There is no room for error. Without power, the pilots have only one chance at landing. If they miss or overshoot the runway, the results could be catastrophic.
I got it. Just to the right. Minimum RAD speed is 140 knots. Maximum speed for gravity gear extension, 200 knots.
I'm not lowering the gear until the last minute, okay?
Okay.
The crew struggle to lose height and speed for landing.
Roger, Lajes. 6 nautical miles.
Let's open the slats. It'll slow us down a bit.
Slats out and locked.
As they approach the runway, their speed increases dangerously. Too fast, and they could run off the end of the runway.
Lower the gear.
Hold on. Speed is about 200. All right. I stabilize the speed. Can you give me a landing speed, please?
No engine, no flaps. Ideal approach speed is 170 knots. We're too fast.
Yes. But the runway is very long.
Captain Pichet now performs a difficult series of swerving maneuvers to slow the plane down for landing.
The plane was almost on a 45-degree angle. I thought it was just gonna flip over and just nosedive straight down.
The plane was circling around the island to slow down. So then we saw land and then we saw water. And when I saw water again, it really struck me that, our chance for survival had maybe was gone.
The runway is long. Yeah, sure, but at the end is a 400-foot cliff. If we don't stop in enough time, we're toast. We're dead.
The crew line up the giant Airbus for the final approach.
Landing gear down and locked. 3 green. No flaps. Only the emergency brakes. No spoilers, no reverse thrust. 4,000 feet, 195 knots. "3,000 feet, 197 knots. "2,000 feet, 200 knots.
Alert the cabin.
Cabin crew, 1 minute to landing.
Hang on. Let's go.
Vertical speed at 3,000 feet per minute. We're going way too fast. And the speed's increasing, 203 knots now. It's way too fast. 1,000 feet, 201 knots.
I'll try to get the nose up. We'll ride fast.
But even if the crew can get the Airbus on the runway, they face a further problem. Without engines, the normal procedures for braking are severely restricted. The danger is far from over. The pilots must land the plane without power and somehow get it to stop.
Everybody, I need you to brace. Hang on.
The Airbus hits hard at high speed.
The tires have blown!
Captain Pichet tries to hold the nose down. After bursting 8 tires, the plane finally stops in the middle of the runway.
So we say we made it! We made it! We made it! Yeah, we made it! Yeah!
Come on, everybody, get out of the way right now. Let's get it. Come on, come on.
Told you we'd make it.
I just wanted to get out of this airplane quickly. I jumped, I hit the ground hard. I don't think my rear end actually even touched the chute at all.
I didn't slide down the slide. I ran down it. And they're just, get out, get out, get out. So you're just running out of this aircraft.
What in God's name just happened? I fell down to the ground, literally, and I started crying.
I mean, once you're off the plane and you're evacuated, you want to know what happened.
Pichet and de Jager had flown their Airbus without power further than any passenger jet in history. As news of their remarkable achievement spread around the world, they found themselves reluctant heroes.
You don't have time really to think about anything else than taking care of the safety of your passenger, you know. That's your main goal, and since we didn't have any engine, the other main goal was to make the landing safely. So at that time, I guess the experience came in, you know. With the help of my colleague, that's why we made a successful landing.
You train for the worst, but you never know how you'll deal with situations like this. And reflecting afterwards, I feel we dealt in the most professional and complete manner we could.
A feeling of being grateful to see all the passengers were okay.
You know, something like this happened, you never know what is going to happen really. I mean, you stop not to believe it. I mean, makes no sense that a big jet with 2 engines has no more power with 300 people on board, you know.
But although the public story was of success, disturbing questions remained. Why had a highly sophisticated airliner run out of fuel? What exactly had happened to Flight 236? Away from the cameras, an accident investigation began immediately by the Portuguese, Canadian, and French transport authorities. Initial checks quickly confirmed that all the fuel tanks of the Airbus were indeed empty. But to lose more than 17 tons of fuel in such a short space of time meant they had a major leak. The question was where? Engineers examined the fuel system, searching for faults in the tanks and the fuel lines. It wasn't long before they found what they were looking for. Just buy the right engine.
In this particular case, you had a hydraulic tube that's relatively small by comparison to the larger fuel tube. And the hydraulic tube, due possibly to pulsations in the hydraulic system, were abrading against the larger tube. And eventually the larger tube had a leak in it, and the leak, or not the leak itself, but the hole eventually possibly led into a fracture of the tube, allowing this massive fuel flow outside of the engine.
The investigators began checking Air Transat maintenance records. They discovered that on the 19th of August, 5 days before the flight, Air Transat had removed the right-hand engine for maintenance and installed a replacement unit sent by Rolls-Royce. But as they analyzed the repair logs for the engine, they uncovered a shocking mistake. This was not a case of faulty design, but of faulty maintenance. Rolls-Royce had supplied the engine without a hydraulic pump assembly. To overcome this, Transat mechanics had used the parts from an older engine. But they didn't fit properly, and the pipes had been rubbing together for 5 days, until midway over the Atlantic, one finally broke.
The engine was delivered minus these 2 tubes and a bracket. that the purpose of that bracket was to maintain adequate clearance. So if they took the bracket off the old engine and put it on the new engine, is that the pipes would be locked together so that they could possibly abrade.
As investigators questioned Air Transat mechanics, they found more disturbing evidence of malpractice. The chief mechanic testified that he had been concerned about the substitution of another hydraulic assembly. 5 days before the accident, he raised his concerns with his superior. The company decided that the aircraft must go back into service and could not wait for the missing parts. He should go ahead with the substitution.
Not exactly. I mean,
The replacement parts only differed from the correct ones by a few millimeters, but it was a difference that nearly cost 306 lives. A few days after the accident, Air Transat publicly accepted responsibility for the faulty maintenance.
We have to realize that there was a small mistake made in terms of changing the pump. We installed it, but then some pipes, so to speak, were needed to be connected to the pump, and there was a mismatch.
The immediate consequences for Air Transat in that event was that they got to pay a fine of $250,000, which was the highest ever in Canada, for an error that could have been prevented.
How someone that is supposed to be qualified in their job can put the wrong part onto an engine and risk 300 people's lives is beyond me.
This incident is a very strong reminder that regulation is important and safety is important, and lives will be lost in the absence of that. And they're real lives. It's not just, this imaginary figure in your head of 300 people. It's real people who suffer and continue to suffer as a result. If it hadn't been us suffering, it would have been our families.
This was by no means the end of the story. Investigators now turned their attention to the cockpit itself. And what role had the crew played in the events of August 24th? Could they have done more to avert the crisis? Key questions remained unanswered. Questions about what happened on the flight deck. The Transport Canada investigation into Air Transat Flight 236 discovered that basic maintenance errors had led to the fuel leak. Air Transat had accepted responsibility and were heavily fined. But the focus now turned on the flight deck and the performance of the crew. What part did they play in the fuel loss?
Wing crossfeed. On.
When the crew opened the cross-feed valve to transfer fuel from the left wing tank to the right, they lost 17 tons of fuel in less than 30 minutes. Yet they failed to close the cross-feed valve and prevent further loss.
We have lost both engines due to fuel starvation. We are gliding now.
In the days after the incident, Captain Robert Pichet and Dirk de Jager were called before the inquiry and asked in detail about their actions. More than 2 years later, these findings have still not been published. What follows are possible explanations for the course of events that night, based on known facts and expert opinion.
Oil temp low and oil pressure high on number 2.
The warnings of high oil pressure and low oil temperature from the number 2 engine on the right wing would not have led the pilots to suspect there was already a major fuel leak.
The indications that were being presented with respect to the oil system would probably not give the crew any indications. They may have questioned what was causing the erroneous or strange indications, but there's nothing certainly in my mind or their training, I think, that would have triggered them to suspect that a fuel system might be involved.
Bet you it's a computer problem.
But although the pilots thought they had a computer error, the oil warnings were actually correct and were the first indication of a much more serious problem.
Fuel imbalance warning. Haven't seen that before.
When the fuel imbalance warning came up 20 minutes later, showing less fuel in the right wing than the left, it seemed unconnected with the oil alarms. This could have reinforced Captain Pichet's idea that he was facing a series of computer errors.
Do not apply this procedure if a fuel leak is suspected.
Despite his doubts, Captain Pichet was obliged to follow Airbus procedure to correct the imbalance. He opened the cross-feed valve.
Wing cross-feed. On.
But was following the checklist enough?
You just can't idly flip switches in response to commands from the computers and anticipate that all will be well at the end of it. You know, once the checklist is complete, we can sit there fat, dumb, and happy. That's not the case at all. You know, you got to keep second guessing it. You know, is that right? Did we do the right checklist? Have we got the results that we need?
Once the pilots calculated the high rate of fuel loss, they should have suspected a fuel leak.
Transat 236 Heavy declaring fuel emergency.
By the time they had confirmed the leak, their options were severely limited.
Now they had a choice. Do I close the crossfeed and see what happens, or do I leave the crossfeed open as the fuel imbalance checklist has dictated? And maybe the situation will correct itself. The crew wasn't really sure.
Captain Pichet believed for a long time that he was facing a computer error. It was only when the engine stopped that he had to accept the fuel leak was genuine. The technological complexity of modern aircraft can help to make them safer and more reliable, but it can also lead to problems that nearly brought catastrophe to Air Transat 236. Discrepancies in replacement parts led to a fuel leak. Distrust of computers led the crew to misread the situation. These errors have huge implications. Only because air traffic control initially sent the plane 60 miles south to avoid congestion was it close enough to the Azores when the crisis struck. Otherwise, it would have had to ditch in the ocean. The Portuguese investigation remains unpublished. Airbus blames the pilots for mishandling the fuel leak. Robert Pichet and Dirk de Jager continue to fly with Air Transat. In August 2002, they received one of the highest honors of the Airline Pilots Association for the longest glide ever accomplished in a passenger airliner. After the accident, Airbus modified its checklist in the event of fuel imbalance. From now on, the computer checks all fuel levels on board against the flight plan. It now gives a clear warning if more fuel is being lost than the engines can consume. Rolls-Royce has reissued a service bulletin alerting all its clients of the incompatibility of two almost similar parts.
Whatever the circumstances are, the pressure that he was under is tremendous. He got that plane down safely, only blew out 8 of the 12 tires, and saved 300 people.